I sold my home care agency for $7.8 million on a Wednesday morning in October, and the first thing I did when the call ended was sit down on the kitchen floor and cry. Not because I was sad, because 41 years had just been handed back to me in a wire transfer confirmation, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. I had started Compass Care in 1983 out of a spare bedroom in our house in Victoria, British Columbia. Back then, my husband was finishing his master's degree in health administration at UVic, and we were living on his student loans and my part-time nursing shifts at the Royal Jubilee. I had $250 saved, a second-hand fax machine, and a conviction that seniors in this city deserved better than what the system was offering them. I recruited 3 retired nurses from my old ward, printed flyers at the library, and knocked on doors in Oak Bay until people started trusting me with their parents. 4 decades later, Compass Care had 12 offices across Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland, a staff of over 300, and a reputation that had taken me to Parliament Hill twice to speak about long-term care reform. The buyers were a national healthcare conglomerate based in Calgary that had been courting me since the spring. I had made them wait. This was not just a business. This was the thing I had poured every early morning and every canceled vacation and every missed school play into. I needed to be sure the people in my care would be protected after I left. My lawyer confirmed the transfer at 9:52 in the morning, 7.8 million Canadian dollars, sitting in an account with my name on it. I stood up from the kitchen floor, washed my face, and thought of my husband. He was at Pacific Ridge Hospital, where he had been director of operations for the past 16 years. It was a 20-minute drive from our house in Fairfield. I had been to his office perhaps 4 or 5 times in all those years. He preferred to keep things separate, which I had always respected. Work was work, home was home. But today was different. Today I needed to see his face when I told him. I needed to watch him understand that everything we had deferred, the trip to Portugal, the summer cottage on the Sunshine Coast, paying down our daughter's student loans from her nursing degree at Dalhousie, all of it was now possible. We were 62 and 64 years old, and we had earned this. I changed out of my housecoat, put on the gray blazer he always said he liked, and drove to the hospital. The receptionist at the administrative wing was a young man named Tyler, who I had met once at the hospital's annual fundraiser. He looked up from his monitor when I came through the glass doors, and something moved across his face that I did not have the context to read at the time. Surprise, certainly, but something underneath the surprise, a kind of bracing. "Good morning," I said. "Is my husband in?" I wanted to surprise him. He glanced at his screen. He's in a meeting. Let me just call ahead." "Oh, don't bother," I said. "I know where his office is. I should probably let him know you're—" I was already walking down the corridor. His office was at the far end, corner room with a window that looked out over the hospital's memorial garden. The door was pulled almost shut but not latched. I could hear voices. I raised my hand to knock and stopped. It was his laugh. The low one. The one he used when he thought no one else was listening. "I know," he said. I know. But after the gala next month, a woman's voice, close, warm in a way that had nothing to do with professional courtesy. She said something I couldn't make out, and then he laughed again. And then there was silence where conversation should have been. I stood in the hallway for what was probably 10 seconds but felt much longer. My hand was still raised. I became aware of the fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead, of the antiseptic smell of the corridor, of the folder in my shoulder bag that held the sale documents, $7.8 million, the number that was supposed to change everything. I pushed open the door. My husband was standing beside the window. His tie was loosened, and his reading glasses were pushed up on his forehead the way they always were when he was relaxed. Standing beside him, close enough that they occupied the same square foot of carpet, was a woman I recognized immediately. She was the director of human resources at Pacific Ridge, late 40s, dark hair cut short. We had spoken at 3 consecutive hospital galas. I had once given her a ride home in the rain because she'd forgotten her umbrella. They both looked at me. The color left my husband's face so quickly and completely that for a moment I thought something was medically wrong with him. "Margaret," he said. My name sounded strange in his voice. "Thin. I wanted to surprise you," I said. The woman took a step back and picked up a folder from the edge of his desk. She did not look at me. I noticed that the folder was empty. "I should get back to my department," she said. Her voice was completely flat. She walked past me without making eye contact and pulled the door closed behind her. My husband and I stood in the room. The memorial garden was gray outside the window. A single bench and a maple that had gone fully orange. "Margaret, how long?" I asked. He reached out and touched the back of his desk chair, like he needed something to hold on to. "It isn't what you think." "How long?" A very long pause. 4 years. 4 years. I did not throw anything. I did not raise my voice. I thought about the hospital gala 4 years ago. Our grandson had just started walking. My mother had been dead for 3 months. I had stood beside my husband at that event and introduced her to people as a colleague, and smiled, and not known. And the gala after that, and the one after that. "I came to tell you something," I said. "The sale went through this morning." He blinked. "The business?" "The transfer cleared at 9:52, 7.8 million. I watched his face. I watched the expression that had been frozen in guilt and panic begin, very slowly, to do something else. His eyes shifted. Something behind them recalibrated. "Margaret," he said, and his voice changed. Got warmer. "That's incredible. Come here. Come and sit down. We need to talk about this properly." "I'm not sitting down." Okay, of course, but this is enormous. This changes everything for us. We need to think about the tax implications, the investment structure. With my background, I can help you navigate this. We should call our financial planner together and— "Us," I said. He stopped. "You said this changes everything for us." I meant what I said. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I need some time to think." "Of course. Take all the time you need. We'll figure this out together, all of it." There was the word again. Together. I left. Walked back down the fluorescent corridor, past Tyler who did not look up, out through the glass doors into the October air. I sat in my car in the visitor parking lot for a long time. The maple in the memorial garden was visible through the fence. The leaves were extraordinary. Then I drove to my lawyer's office. I had worked with my lawyer for 18 years. He was 66, originally from Halifax, and had navigated his own difficult divorce in his mid-50s with the kind of quiet precision that I had always admired. When his assistant showed me into his office that afternoon, he put down the document he was reviewing immediately. "Unscheduled visit on the day of the transfer," he said. "Tell me." I told him. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always valued about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "British Columbia Family Law Act," he said. "Excluded property. The business was started with your own funds before the marriage?" $250 I had saved from nursing. "It predates our marriage by 14 months. "And you never commingled the business assets with joint marital funds?" "Never. I kept it entirely separate." He had full access to our joint accounts and his own income. Compass Care had its own books, its own accounts, its own everything. He nodded slowly. "Under the Act, property brought into the relationship and its growth is excluded. He would have a difficult time claiming a portion of the sale proceeds." "And the grounds for divorce?" "Adultery. 4 years. I'll need to document it." "Do you have anything concrete?" "Not yet, but I can get it." My lawyer leaned back in his chair and looked at me carefully. "I've known you a long time, Margaret. I'm going to ask you directly. Is this what you want?" "What I wanted," I said, "was to walk into my husband's office this morning with $7.8 million worth of good news. I wanted to cry a little and then make plans, and then take him somewhere to celebrate. What I found was a 4-year affair and a man who heard the number and immediately started talking about how he could help manage it." He nodded. "Right. Here's what we do. 1. The transfer stays where it is, in your account, and we document that the funds are excluded property. 2. We move quickly, before he has time to position himself legally. 3. You need documentation of the affair. Witness statements, photographs, anything contemporaneous. How long? How long can you give me?" 2 weeks, I said. I spent those 2 weeks becoming a version of myself that I did not entirely recognize but found, to my mild surprise, that I respected. First, I called Tyler. Not at work. I found his number through a mutual acquaintance and invited him for coffee at a small place in James Bay, far enough from the hospital that he wouldn't feel watched. He was nervous, stirring his coffee in circles without drinking it. "I'm not angry at you," I said. "I'm not here to make any of this harder for you, but I need to understand what you know." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Everyone on the admin floor knows, Mrs. Everyone knows. It's been going on for years. They leave the building together on Friday afternoons. There was a conference in Kelowna last spring and they shared a room. I saw the booking. I'm sorry. I always thought you must know. Most spouses figure it out." I patted his hand. "Thank you for being honest with me." Next, I contacted a private investigator in Vancouver. A woman, semi-retired from the RCMP, recommended by my lawyer. We met at her office in Kitsilano. She was direct and completely without sentimentality, which was exactly what I needed. "You'll want audio," she said. "In Canada, one-party consent means you can record any conversation you're personally part of. Carry your phone set to record whenever you're alone with him at home. I'll handle the external documentation." She handled it thoroughly. Over the following 10 days, she produced photographs of my husband and the woman entering and leaving a suite at a hotel in downtown Victoria that he had been booking on a credit card I had not known existed. She obtained records of transfers from our joint line of credit, money that had gone toward dinners and weekends and, as she noted with professional neutrality, what appeared to be the partial renovation of a secondary property. "A secondary property," I said. "What secondary property?" She slid a printed record across the table. "A condo in Sonic, purchased 4 years ago." My husband's name was on the title. He had taken equity from our joint home to fund the down payment without my signature. Under BC law, that required both our names as co-owners. His had been the only one on the documentation. His lawyer went very quiet when we presented this in our first joint meeting. My lawyer presented it without drama, simply laid the pages on the table. My husband's face did something I had not seen it do in 42 years of marriage. It collapsed. We did not press the matter through criminal channels. What we required was a clean settlement. He kept his RRSP accounts and his pension. He received no portion of the Compass Care sale proceeds, which were confirmed as my excluded property under the Act. We sold the Fairfield house and split the proceeds after recovering the equity he had drawn on without authorization. He was also required to buy out my share of the joint investments he had depleted over the 4 years of the affair. The woman at Pacific Ridge stopped answering his calls approximately 6 weeks after the separation became known at the hospital. My daughter told me later, with a certain economy of expression, that apparently the situation had become professionally untenable for her once HR was no longer a viable shield. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. I was 63 years old. I was single for the first time since I was 20. And I had $7.8 million, less taxes and legal fees, sitting in accounts I controlled entirely. My daughter was the first person I told, the full version, beginning to end. She was furious in the quiet way she had always been furious since she was a teenager, which was more frightening than shouting. She loved her father, I told her. That was not going to change because of my choices, and it shouldn't. What he had done was between him and me. She listened and was quiet, and then she said, "Mom, I need you to know that I suspected something for a long time and I'm so sorry I didn't say anything." I told her there was nothing to say. Then I told her I needed her help with something. With the settlement behind me, I sat down with a financial advisor. I had found her through a referral network for women managing sudden wealth. She worked out of an office in Vancouver and had the kind of measured competence that made you feel like your money was going somewhere with a plan. We allocated carefully. A substantial portion went into conservative investments, a mix of bonds, dividend funds, and real estate investment trusts. A portion I directed toward a foundation I had been thinking about during the 8 months of legal proceedings. I named it the Steady Ground Foundation. Its purpose was to provide startup grants and mentorship to women over 50 who wanted to start businesses, specifically in the care sector, home care, child care, elder care. The kind of work that gets dismissed as soft and turns out to be the infrastructure that holds everything else up. My daughter agreed to sit on the board. She had her father's head for administration, which I had once thought was a compliment. A portion I kept liquid, and a portion I used to do the things that I had been putting off. I did not rent a cottage on the Sunshine Coast. I bought one. Small, cedar-sided, on a piece of property near Sechelt, with a view of the water that did something to my chest every morning. I spent 2 weeks there in the spring, learning to kayak from an instructor who was 27 years old and had the patience of someone twice his age. I went to Portugal, not a package tour. I rented an apartment in Lisbon for 3 weeks and walked until my hips ached and ate sardines and pastries and sat in tiled courtyards with a book and no particular schedule. I had spent 41 years with a very particular schedule. I paid down my daughter's student loans in full. I set up education accounts for my grandchildren with conditions attached, funds available for post-secondary education and seed capital for a business or first home purchase, but not simply handed over. They had to work for the rest, and I started meeting people, not looking for anyone. That was not the point, and I knew enough about myself by then to know I would have made a mess of it if that had been the goal. But I discovered that I enjoyed going to gallery openings and lectures and community board meetings on my own, and that when I met interesting men in those contexts, the conversations were different than they had ever been when I was somebody's wife. There was a retired judge from the Okanagan who took me to dinner twice before his daughter's wedding pulled him back to Kelowna. There was a documentary filmmaker who talked about the Arctic for 4 hours over a meal in Chinatown and made me feel like I had learned something real. None of it was serious. I didn't want serious. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be curious about a person. 14 months after the divorce, I was back in Victoria for my grandson's 7th birthday. My daughter had organized a dinner afterward at a restaurant in the Inner Harbor that she and I used to go to before the grandchildren arrived, back when she was in her 20s and we were still in the stage of figuring out how to be adults together. The birthday party was loud and excellent. My grandson wanted a dinosaur cake and received one. I got frosting on my blazer and didn't mind. The dinner afterward was the 4 of us, me, my daughter, her husband, and our grandson who fell asleep in his chair before the main course arrived. We ordered too much food and a bottle of wine that my daughter's husband knew something about and I did not but was willing to learn. The waiter had just brought our appetizers when I looked up. My husband was sitting at a table near the far window. Across from him was a woman I didn't recognize. She was perhaps 55, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the look of someone who smiled easily. They were not holding hands. They were having a conversation. He looked comfortable. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. I watched his expression go through several things very quickly. I held his gaze for a moment, not warmly and not coldly, and then I looked back at my daughter. She had seen. "Mom," she said quietly, "are you all right?" "Perfectly," I said. "Tell me about the wine." She told me about the wine. Our grandson made a small sound in his sleep, and then went still. My son-in-law refilled my glass with the focused care of a man who understood that this was not a moment that needed commentary. Later, as we were gathering coats and bags by the door, my husband appeared at my elbow. "Margaret," he said, "you look well, thank you." He was quiet for a moment, a long moment. I knew all of his silences. This was the one that meant he was trying to decide how much he owed me. "I heard about the foundation," he said finally. "What you're doing with it. I think it's a good thing." "I'm glad you think so." He looked at his hands. "I do think about how things ended. I want you to know that. I considered what to say. I chose the truth, which was also the kindest available option. I think you should be with someone who has your full attention," I said, "and I'm glad it wasn't me anymore." He didn't respond to that. I don't think he had expected it. I said goodnight and walked out with my daughter, who took my arm on the waterfront and didn't say anything for half a block. Then she said, "That was very elegant, Mom." "I thought it was," I agreed. She laughed. We walked along the harbor in the October dark, the lights on the water and the cold coming in off the strait, and I thought about the morning 14 months ago when I had sat on my kitchen floor and cried because 41 years had been handed back to me and I didn't know what to do with my hands. I knew now. Not all of it. Some of it was still being figured out, which I had come to understand was the correct and ongoing condition of a life. There was a photography program I had been reading about. 6 weeks in Prince Edward Island, small group instruction, focused on landscape and documentary work. My financial advisor had mentioned it half-jokingly at our last meeting, and I had written it down without telling her I was serious. I was 63 years old, and I had all the time in the world to become someone I had not yet been. It turned out that was not a loss. It was the only thing I had ever sold that was worth more than what I paid for it.